Political analyst, Professor Somadoda Fikeni. Professor, very good afternoon to you. Happy Africa Day. Welcome to PM News.
Well, thanks for inviting me, and also Happy Africa Day for you and your viewers.
Thank you, Professor. Let's be very real. What are the most urgent matters that the African continent needs to deal with, and rather swiftly, Professor?
The first one is political stability and peace, as well as security. And the second one is economic development in a real sense that begin to have a positive impact on its people. And those are the two key priorities. And once that happens within the context of an integration process, starting with the regions up to the continent, it will definitely place Africa in a very strong strategic position.
Professor, the biggest topic currently is the promotion of intracontinental migration and trade to try and stop the illicit exports. But how can this then be achieved in a realistic transition that will ideally benefit the continent itself?
In the first place, you need committed leadership, which is driven by deep conviction, having identified and internalized the problem. And once that is done, the plans which are hashed at the African Union and at the African Union Commission ought to speak to this particular element. One, how to prevent the traditional Africa infrastructure that takes minerals from pit to port and begin to have an infrastructure of roads, communication, and transport in general that begin to link African countries in order to promote good commerce which is mutually beneficial. The issue of creating manufacturing base as well as providing human capital, a skilled one, to sustain such growth. I think Africa has what they call demographic dividends. A young population, growing middle class at a very fast pace, therefore the demand for consumption is growing, and it's a matter of putting those plans in place. Africa, if it works to fight corruption, because the issue of illicit trade is very much linked to corruption, and to make sure that they go to all international platforms to fight any possible flight of capital which is illegal from the continent and use their continental muscle to do so.
Professor, look, with Africa Day not an official holiday in most countries in the continent, how do we then preserve, promote and commemorate this day as individuals in our respective countries? We always hear the saying, charity begins at home and each one must teach one. How do we translate this into action?
Well, I do think that rolling out symbols such as the African Union flag, as well as injecting the syllabus and the history of Africa, particularly profiling all the efforts of Africa and work towards African Union. And that in itself, I think, will go a long way. And over time, it is not inconceivable that African countries could decide to set aside a day of a holiday or events, because it doesn't necessarily have to be a holiday per se. Sometimes people simply go on a braai instead of focusing on the issues. So if you could have activities just like the Mandela Day, where you do have a range of activities, it might have a lot more benefit than just a holiday.
Professor, before I let you go, your Africa Day message to all Africans. We're now pleased to be broadcasting all over Africa.
It's to be proud and knowledgeable about our past, be understanding and reflective on our current challenges and opportunities, and make sure that we work together to make the 21st century an Africa century which will wipe out centuries of humiliation and pain.
Professor, thank you so much for your time. That was Professor Somadoda Fikeni, a political analyst, talking to us about Africa Day, what it means and what it should mean.